What up, guys? This is Carroters. Welcome back to the Carrot Poker Podcast. Today's episode is called Hands from the Corner, episode 1, and it's the first in a long line of episodes that won't all follow each other successively, but I will throw these in from time to time, and in these episodes we'll be going through the Carrot Corner hand review subsection forum, and we'll be reviewing some hands posted by my lovely students. We'll basically be going over their analysis of the hand first, talking about the spot, obviously getting acquainted with it, going over their analysis and talking about what they did wrong, did right, and what they thought wrong and thought right. I always encourage people not just to post a hand and be like, call river, and then get answers like, yes, call river, no, fold. Like, some forums are like that, and it's like totally, completely retarded. Like, it's the worst way you could ever fathom of going over a poker hand. It's just randomly generating an answer. Like, I've seen students in the past come to me and be like, someone once told me you should never ever c-bet a paired board. And they'll actually have, like, reasoning like this that they've just, like, kind of heard from a friend or something in the past, and they've just taken as gospel and just applied, and then they're really confused because the next day someone says, you should always c-bet a paired board, and obviously none of these things are ever true. There's never, like, alwayses and nevers that span such a wide array of spots as a paired board. There are just so many different paired boards, and so many different situations in which you can see those paired boards on the flop. So it's just totally ridiculous to have these kind of black and white statements, and when we don't go into detail on hands, we end up arriving at black and white answers sometimes. It seems like we should just memorize the answer so that when a spot comes up that we might deem similar in the future, we can just apply that answer. And that's obviously not how poker thinking works. That's not how poker learning works. In coaching, I'll never be like, do you think you should call a fold here? Call. No, you should fold. Wrong. Next question. It's just ridiculous. Like, you always have to say, so why do you think, what arguments could there be in favor of calling here, in favor of folding? Analyze the different lines. Like, try and work out which one's going to be higher EV or form the highest EV strategy in the long term, and arrive at that answer through logic, deduction, like thinking for yourself. That's the thing. So my students in these hands that you're about to view or you're about to hear about are all thinking for themselves. Some of them are thinking well, some of them might be thinking pretty poorly. That's okay. Their levels are going to be different. So some logic might be horrible, and I might say, this logic's wrong, but by posting that logic, they've then learned why it's bad logic, and they can avoid it in the future and learn how to think about the spot in a better way. So that's what poker's all about. Giving your heart and soul when you post a hand, giving every single thought that went through your head, like literally exhausting all the thoughts that you have about that spot, and then seeing what others think about those thoughts. Because by doing that, you can extrapolate a lot of information about other spots. By just going, should I fold, yes or no, you get nowhere in that front. So let's get started. The first hand comes from one of our newer members. So obviously with someone who's a bit newer to the game and newer to the corner, you're expecting more thoughts in the thought process stream to be correctable, and that's absolutely fine and completely normal. I've not actually looked at hands that this guy has posted yet, so they might be okay, they may not be, but in any case, he's posting hands in the forum, he's giving an articulate and long thought process, and that's really good. And so regardless of how good those thoughts are, there'll be a lot of learning taking place there. So the first step is complete. It doesn't matter how right or wrong your thoughts are. What matters is that you put them all out there, that you spill the contents of your brain in a logical way, as logical as you can anyway, and you get critique on it, basically. Right, so this is a c-bet spot, and Hero starts off by saying, I never knew how tough c-bet spots are to think about and learn properly. So here goes on my c-bet thought process. I think he's recently bought the book, The Grinder's Manual, so he's sort of reached chapter 4, and realize that there's a hell of a lot that goes into c-betting. It's not just, I'm the aggressor from the previous street, let's continue to represent strength. Back in the old days, that used to be rationale for c-betting, like, represent the board. Like, come on, what does that even mean? What does it even have to do with EV? Like, let's actually think about EV here. So, having read chapter 4, this student obviously has an idea that, well, c-betting is quite complex. There are different factors that lead to a decision, so let's go through the factors. There's two ways you can think about c-betting, by the way. You can think about it in terms of in a vacuum, where you just consider board texture, how many villains are there, your equity, is it plus EV, do we get enough folds, do we reach our RFE, required fold equity target? If we bet half pot, we need 33% folds, do we get them? If we have no equity, if we have equity, we need less. Or there's out of a vacuum thinking on c-betting, where we consider our c-bet strategy. How are we playing our range on the flop? Are we polarized, or do we c-bet our whole range because we're significantly ahead and in position? These kind of things. So on the flop, Hero starts by saying, well, let's go through the hand first. Actually, we need to know what the hand actually is. That's always useful. So Hero opens the button for a min raise because he's read chapter 2 of the Grounder's Manual and knows that min raising against regs is the appropriate strategy at these stakes for sure. So he does that. People don't call wide enough. They 3-bet or fold too much still. It's very, very, very placebo to min raise buttons. Big blind calls. Big blind, do we have any reads on him? I don't believe we know anything about him, or at least it's not given if we do. So big blind calls us, and the flop comes 4-9-5 rainbow. We have a 7 off, no backdoor draws or anything like that, obviously. So big blind checks, and Hero reasons the flop. Hero checks back the flop, and he says, I have no showdown value to protect. I don't think I have a lot of future equity. Flop is semi-dry, however medium pocket pairs are calling one street, as well as Jack 9, Queen 9, King 9, 10 9 and Ace 9. Again, the board is 9-5-4 rainbow, we have Ace 7 off. So these are all like reasons that are kind of encouraging that Hero's thinking about things like showdown value. You don't have enough showdown value that you necessarily want to bet for protection here alone, but in a sense you kind of do have some showdown value. Like, you have Ace 7, and the board's 9-5-4. Like, how does the average butted big blind calling range hit 9-5-4 dry? Not very well. It misses the board a lot. Often it has 2 overcards that are both live against you. Hands like Jack 10, Queen Jack, Queen 10, King 10, King Jack. These hands all have live overcards, 2 of them. Some hands have 1 live overcard. Some hands have gut shots. So I wouldn't say that there's nothing to protect here at all. It's not like we have like the worst hand like a large amount of the time. We actually have the best hand here relatively often, like maybe half the time or something. Maybe slightly more. So given that we have the best hand a lot here, and the board is very, very dry, and we're in position, and we have a big range advantage here because we have hands like aces, kings, queens, jacks. He doesn't. We have 9s. He may not. We should probably just bet everything. I don't see there being a reason to check here. Now, if we were out of position, Ace 7 would be a pretty decent hand to check, fold, and give up with because it can win if villain just checks back king high. So it doesn't gain as much by betting as like queen high would. And by check folding, you know, we endorse the fact that we just don't have very much in the way of redraws. Our hand's not turning all that well. And yeah, we just don't have that much options in terms of barrel cards either. We can turn some gutters, but that's about it. Some open-enders, but that's all. So I think that out of position, small blind versus big blind, I could get behind the flop check. But in position, on a board like this, you just have plainly easily enough fold equity to c-bet. And that's what it's all about. You've just got loads of fold equity. You don't need much. You don't need any pot equity here. Like, if you bet half pot, it needs to work a third of the time. In a vacuum, I think it's clearly going to work a third of the time. Like I said, there's 2 types of thinking, right? You can think in or out of a vacuum. So let's think out of a vacuum now. There's no need for a checking range in Hero's strategy. And the reason for that is that if Hero checks anything here, he's literally just giving up the value of protection, the EV of protection, so villain can hit turns. He's also failing to protect fold equity. Now, the protection of fold equity, this is a concept that I coined like a few months ago, and it basically means that on the flop, we just can imagine that our fold equity is very good in general, unless villain is very crazy. On 9-5-4 two-tone, he can't continue that wide. It's just, he should be folding like half the time easily. So, we have that fold equity. We can make that bet and realise it now, but should we check and villain leads turn, now we can no longer just bet half pot as the pot was on the flop to win the pot. Now we're facing a turn bet. We have to raise now when we've already capped our range. It's just very difficult to get fold equity now. We could have just had it on the flop, but we didn't protect that fold equity there and then. So this is kind of important. And that's why our strategy lends, the best strategy here is one that lends itself to just betting everything. There's no real hand here that doesn't benefit from protection or 3 streets of value. Like, there's no hand that's getting 3 streets of value or that's getting less than 3 streets of value that doesn't want to protect its equity. A hand like 10s wants to protect its equity. 9x wants to protect its equity. Ace 4 wants to protect its showdown value. There's no reason to check here from either outlook. So this should be a bet for about 11 into 22, 10 into 22. That would be fine. That's what the pot is on the flop. It's 10 NL. So, or sorry, 5 NL. So definitely a mistake on the flop there. Let's move on. That's fine. So we've diagnosed where Hero's thought process went wrong was that he's overestimating the importance of not having future equity. You don't always need equity in the hand to bet. You just need like a combination of the factors to be good in a vacuum. And maybe it's good for Hero to stay in a vacuum for now and just consider spots in a vacuum. You know, get those down and then move on to consider long-term EV considerations like whether to range bet the flop based on how range advantage works and all these kind of things. But anyway, like, you don't need that much, you don't need any equity when the board is 9-5-4 and you have position. Like, the factors are just all in your favour. Everything else is in your favour against one opponent. That's great. You know, you've got very high chance of just picking up the pot on the flop, like at least a very significant chance. You want to protect that equity and fold equity and showdown value right away. You do have some showdown value to protect here, but that's not relevant. Whether I had, deuce 6 here for a gut shot, or like, I don't know, 7 deuce here for 7 high, or I had a7, or I had queen jack with 2 diamonds and loads of backdoor draws, I'd still bet everything. I bet all of those hands. Okay, so turn comes down to 3 of diamonds, so the board is now 9-5-4-3 with a diamond draw. 2 diamonds on the board, and now that heroes check back the flop, the big blind actually leads here for 15 out of 22. So this is what we wanted to avoid. This is the branch in the tree that we shouldn't be encountering, because we should have realised the best flop action in the first place and avoided this branch. This is not a happy branch for us. Now we have to call. We've got ace high and a gut shot. We can't fold here. We have the best hand a lot still. It's a clear call in position, but we'd much rather have just protected our equity by betting the flop. That's just a much better world for us. We get villain to basically fold hands that have reasonable equity. Here he's always seen the river for investing the same price, and he's got to see the turn as well. So clearly this can't be the best branch here that we end up facing this turn bet. So we should definitely have c-bet flop. Now we face 15 into 22 on the turn. We call it with our gut shot. Again, 9-5-4-3. We have a7. We have 1 diamond in our hand. It's only 3 to the flush, so it's not a draw. But I think pretty clear call nonetheless. River is the ace of hearts, so hero makes top pair, maybe breathes a sigh of relief when villain checks, and it seems that hero's top pair is good very often. So, hero reasons. When the ace comes in the river, I think the best play would be to check back. Don't like that thought, because there's no justification. There's no why. Why is it the best play? Why do you think that? You need to tell me why you think it's the best play to check back. It's not enough just to state that it's the best play. Because I don't think it is. I think this is like, there's value to be had here against the average 5NL player. Like, he's not bet river. Most of the time, people are not going to be like fancy enough or sophisticated enough to develop much of a check raising game here for value, or even as a bluff at all. So I expect to get check raised in this river like almost never by better or worse. These stakes can happen sometimes, but not often. Hands like deuce X that have made a straight are going to bet the river most of the time. Better ace X, 2 pair sets are going to bet the river. You just have the best hand here a hell of a lot with ace 7. You also block 6-7 if he ever does have that, but I doubt it. So, board is 9-5-4-3 ace. I think that you clearly should value bet here in position, just small, like half pot. Trying to get called by 9X that was like betting the turn for value protection. Trying to get called by some pocket pair, some pair. That's it basically. I would make a small value bet. Don't bet too big here, because your range is like totally airless. You don't have any air in your range that you want to bluff with really so much. And well, you might have some floats on the turn, but it's weird for me to like even talk about this, because I would just bet my whole range on the flop. So I'm not really sure what a range looks like now that we get to the river, but I wouldn't worry about that. I would just play the spot in a vacuum, given how rarely we've played it so far. And I would just like go ahead and make the best vacuum play here, which I think is betting the river for half pot. I think we're easily plus 50% when called, and I don't think we get raced off our hand often enough to negate that. So I think that value betting the river is definitely good. Okay, so that's the end of that hand. I would play the flop and the river differently, but I agree with the way you've played pre-flop and the turn. I think your reasoning can definitely be improved, and I've told you how to do that. I've told you what things are a bit more relevant, what things are a bit less relevant. So yeah, definitely c-bet that flop and value bet that river. We've got comments on the thread below, people saying kind of similar things basically. Also, like, don't worry about being check raised on the river. Heroes also asked in the thread, what do you do if you're check raised on the river? You just fold. Like, people don't really check raise bluff this river ever, and they might for value sometimes, but not very often either. I just fold. I don't worry about it. It's a branch that happens almost never. So a branch that occurs very infrequently just doesn't matter in the bigger picture. Sure, it's uncomfortable when it happens, but the discomfort fallacy in poker is that uncomfortable spots are horrible and need to be avoided. That's not true. They're just horrible when they happen. If they hardly ever happen, or they're not even low EV, they're not important. Don't worry about it. Just shrug it off, move on to the next hand, fold the river. It's okay. Right. Next hand, we'll go through one by a different student now, out of fairness, in case people are watching this from the corner and want their hand reviewed by me on podcast. So here is one by another student, right? So he says there's a lot of analysis here, So I'm going to go through this and kind of pick and skim the analysis that I think is the most instructive to go over. He's done a lot of analysis here, but I feel like we might be here until 5 o'clock. It's now 12:30. If I read all of it, that's a good thing though. It means that you've put a lot of work into this hand review, which is awesome. So student says, I did not feel at all comfortable in this hand, but I felt like the odds the pot was laying me the whole way through might justify my play. Note, I'm going to refer to the original opener in this hand as under the gun, even though he is 5-handed, so they're effectively the hijack. Well picked up on, that's very true. I like to standardise positions on the table so that the hijack is always the hijack, regardless of whether there's a guy to act before him or not. I only use under the gun if we're 6-handed. I use it to denote the first player to act in a 6-handed game. I don't use it to denote the first player to act because that in any game, because 4-handed, that's the cutoff at the button. You can't be the button and under the gun at the same time in the way that I use the word. If we use under the gun just to mean first to act, it just becomes kind of meaningless and irrelevant as a term, and it doesn't designate a seat accurately and objectively in a rigid way like we'd want it to. So that's how I recommend thinking about the table. Anyway, slight deviation there. So under the gun is 17-15 over 124 hands. We have a tight looking small blind but over a very small sample, and big blind looks like a fish over 19 hands. So let's look at the hand now. Hero has 9s, so hijack raises to 30, and I'm gonna refer to him as hijack. It does say under the gun in the hand converter, but I'm gonna call this hijack. So hijack raises to 30, hero calls 30, so hijack is the one that Hero's called under the gun, the 17-15 over 124 hands. So it's 10 NL, he raises 3 big blinds to 30 cents, hero calls 30 cents. Small blind squeezes to 140, big blind calls 130, so he cold calls, and then hijack calls as well, and hero calls. So basically hero's called an open, which is fine. There's then a small blind squeeze, a big blind flat, under the gun's called, so now hero's getting a phenomenal price, pot odds wise and implied odds wise to mine. He's called 80 cents. The 10x rule of set mining says he needs to make $8 back on average. Well, there's already going to be $24.80 in the pot just by pre-flop, so he only needs to make another $4 post-flop if he makes a set. Very achievable. Clearly hero should flat here. It's a definite set mine. For sure. So we need to call. So 3-bet, big squeezed pot. I actually looked at this before and I kind of didn't realise that this was a squeezed pot, and I may have given bad advice on this thread actually, because I just glanced at it last night and gave some advice and I was a bit tired. So yeah, just bear that in mind, original poster, if you're listening to this podcast. So on the flop, pot's 560, so it's very big. We have effective stack left behind. Here's 1348 deep, but he covers everyone. With hijack, we are 13 deep. $13 deep basically, so there's like another what's hero invested? Yeah, it's like another $11 or so, 11.50 left behind here in the stack with a pot of 560 effective. So 11.50 effective into a pot of 560 left on the flop. So small blind checks, the original squeezer checks this flop. Big blind checks, under the gun checks, action to hero. Right, if this was a single raise pot, I'd be betting here. However, I think that this is pretty scary. Like, there's 3 players, they have all checked the flop, but how often are 9s really the best hand in this situation? I don't think as often. I can see people checking jacks and 10s here for sure. You could bet fold the flop and that may be the best play. In fact, it probably is the best play, because you do have the best hand some significant amount of time, just not all that often. That you've got 3 players here. It's quite likely one of them has a pocket pair, but you do beat like 8s and 7s, I guess, which can easily be in there. You don't beat jacks, 10s, queens. Kings and aces could be in there, but I think usually hijack will bet a good overpair here, as well small blind. Big blind probably should bet as well with a lot of overpairs, but we definitely can't say that they always bet overpairs here. Big blind to cold caller could easily be a fish here. So flop is 6-4-3 two-tone. Hero has pocket 9 still. It checks to him. 3 people check the 6-4-3 two-tone board. Did I say the flop before? I hope I did. Maybe I didn't. What to do here then? Low board. Everyone's checked. Well, I do think that we should still try and protect our equity. I think we're good often enough here, and we'll get messed with infrequently enough here for a way that bet fold is fine. Bet 250. Don't bet too big, or bet like $2 or something. Just try and pick up this pot when we're ahead. If ace king wants to call us once, that's fine too. We can just try and head for showdown after that. I bet once and give up turn if I get any action, and I would certainly fold for a flop raise. So I'd bet like 250 here, 225 into 560, something like that, and then I would just give up. So I do think we should protect here. I do think we have the best hand a reasonable chunk, even 4-way, because I do think a better hand will bet this flop quite often. I think ranges are definitely more capped now, and if we let a free card roll off and it's an overcard to the board through our 9s, almost certainly someone makes a better hand than us. Maybe not on a 10, but on a Jack, Queen, King, Ace, like, we're just going to have the worst hand. We're 4-way, protection is way more important, multi-way, because there's way more outs against your hand. You can think of the villains you're against as an implied larger villain that have like 6 cards, overcards between them instead of 2, you know, so that's going to make it pretty horrible and difficult to get to showdown, or 5 here, 10, Jack, Queen, King, Ace, to our pocket 9s. So I think you want to bet flop. Hero actually checks flop. His reasoning for that is the flop comes all low cards with 2 hearts and it checks around to me. I think small blinds check here narrows his range. That's the original squeezer. Drastically, I agree. Surely he should bet ace, ace and king, king again here for value and protection. Definitely. Ace of hearts, king of hearts would bet again. Yeah, possibly, probably. He looks like a net over the small sample, so maybe he checks jack, jack for some kind of pot control, though I don't think that's such a great idea. Big blinds range, a cold caller. Here is wide open. Suited connectors and broadways, probably a bunch of offsuit broadways as well as deuce, deuce, 5, 5, 7, 7, jack, jack. Best hand under the gun can have his queen, queen. Not necessarily, actually. I mean, some people will flat with kings plus here. That's a hell of a massive assumption to make that under the gun never 4-bets. Kings and aces, I think people will flat there and keep the fish in the pot and stuff like that and not have a 4-bet range there sometimes, but you might be right that at 10NL people are just automated and they're just like always 4-betting king, king plus. It's possible. I'd definitely discount them, certainly, like considerably, but I wouldn't say he never has better. It's just too strong a blanket claim for me. He can have kings and aces, just they're discounted. Let's go with that. When he doesn't bet flop, though, I discount them even further, so I do agree that they are a very small part of his range for sure. So Hero then says, I'm not happy here either, but I'm getting nearly... Sorry, I'm looking at the wrong street. Hero says, I don't think I gain a great deal from betting here with so much showdown value. Well, you do. You're not thinking about protection. You gain an absolute shitload from betting here. You protect all that showdown value. You gain loads. If you had stable showdown value because there were no cards higher than a 9 in the deck, then you wouldn't gain anything by betting. You just head for showdown. It would be silly to bet. But when you... protection is so massively linked to EV in this kind of situation. Because the EV of checking here, you will lose the pot like a very significant amount of the time by the river just by someone catching up. Whereas if your flop bet works like a very significant amount of the time, it picks up that pot, your EV is gained significantly by betting. So no, you don't gain a lot in a bluffing sense by folding out better or getting called by worse, but you gain a lot in a protection sense, which is the third reason to bet. And this is why I believe we should separate reasons to bet into 3 reasons. Sure, at the end of the day, it's all EV. EV is the one reason, but you can separate aspects of EV, ways that humans think about EV, into value, bluff, and protection. I think it's the best way to teach reasons to bet. So we should definitely bet flop. The turn completes the flush draw and small blind checks again. So the turn's a 2 of hearts now. So it's 4 of hearts, 6 of hearts, 3 of hearts, 2 of hearts. Pocket 5s has just got there, deuces has made a set. Hands have improved at this point, certainly. So we've checked the flop behind. We luckily didn't get an overcard turn. It's not the best turn. Hero says the turn pairs the board. No, it doesn't. It doesn't pair the board. That's just a slight error there, but I don't think that matters. But I don't think this is of any consequence. It's rare anyone has a full house. So Hero's like misread the board texture here, which is somewhat unfortunate to his analysis, but no big deal, I guess. And what happens on the turn is that it checks, small blind checks, big blind bets 120 into 560, so the cold caller leads for 120, pretty small, into 560. Hijack, or under the gun, whatever you want to call him, calls, and Hero calls. That seems reasonable. I don't think we can fold at this point. Hero reasons, I don't see what I can represent by bluffing, and I still have a good amount of showdown value. Yep, you do. You do want to call here now. You don't have the best hand often enough to raise following this action on this card. So protection demands that Hero has the best hand often enough that he doesn't lose unnecessary loads of extra money all the time against better. On this turn card, I think it's really spewy to raise. Like, you lose a lot more money when someone's made a flush now or a set of deuces or pocket 5s for a straight. So you want to be very careful there. And so you can bet flop against 3 checks for protection because you're gonna pick up the pot a lot, and you do have the best hand like fairly often. On the turn, for 1, there's less cards to come, so protection's less of a big deal with just 1 card to stop people seeing than 2. And also, you're gonna have the best hand a bit less often now facing this action, so you just want to call. River's a 2 of diamonds. River pairs the board. Check, check, check. By the way, small blind, the original squeezer, had folded the turn. FYI, probably had 2 big cards without a heart. So now Big Blind, the cold caller from pre-flop, checks the river of the deuce of diamonds. Board is 4-6-3 deuce deuce. Under the gun checks, and hero checks behind. I agree with this. I think it would be way too thin to value bet the river. What does hero say? Doesn't seem to say much about the river. So I decided the best option is to take my hand to showdown and check it down. Yeah, okay, good. I found this hand super interesting. We'd be glad to hear everyone's thoughts on it. Yeah, very interesting hand. You need to bet flop. You're just underestimating how massively essential protection is to EV in such a situation as this. So my advice here was protection is very relevant here on the flop. It's building on what other people had said as well, that you need to bet the flop, basically. Okay, let's see how we're doing for time on this podcast. Wow, we've been going for much longer than I actually thought, so we're going to wrap up there, having done 2 hands. I'm going to be back with another Hands from the Corner segment very soon. I hope you enjoyed this format. Leave me some feedback. Email me, admin@carrotcorner.com, or go to my website if you're looking for the Grounders Manual. It's available there still in PDF, and the Kindle version's on its way. Apologies for the delays with it for anyone eagerly waiting on the Kindle version. I've got a guy on the job now who's very good building it, but he's a one-man machine with a bit of limited time right now, so it's going to be made very soon. It's going to be available, but I'm still quite a small 1 or 2 person business at the moment, so it's kind of difficult to get things done super fast, but it will be out. It will be out quickly. All I can say is please keep being patient. I appreciate your patience if you want the manual in Kindle and are eagerly awaiting that. There will be a live book, I think, at some point down the line when I've done more publicizing and sold more, but for now we're going to be sticking with the 2 online formats. So see you in the next podcast. Thank you very much for your continued support and for listening to the Carrot Poker Podcast.